Hi there, welcome back to Amplify. So today's video is by popular demand. I have several clients at the moment who are just getting ready to break ground on a new podcast. And the thing is, a lot of people make a lot of money by making simple things seem really difficult. So in this video, I'm going to break down step by step exactly how to get your podcast from idea to executed very, very quickly. So everything I'm going to discuss really assumes you've already got your idea locked in. You know what your show will be about, you know what the format is, and you know what you'll call it. And you've basically done all of that, the idea work. Next, we're going to look at what does it actually take to make it happen. I also need to make it clear that this is the very, very simple way of making it done. You can make this very complicated. You can add in a lot of moving parts. I want to show you the simplest way of doing it without wasting any time. A lot of the fancy things that you'll hear about podcasting assume that you've got an audience and you need to go through a special launch process to get the best possible exposure. If you don't have an audience, you just need to get your podcast started and start building your audience. What are we going to cover today? We are going to look at the really simple guide to getting your podcast started in under 1 hour. Now, there are a few parts to this, and I'm breaking it down into two parts. Part one is your show setup. It's the stuff you're going to have to do once. And then I'm going to show you what are the things you're going to need to do every week. And there's a bit of crossover, but not much. Hopefully you'll see that it's really, really simple. So first of all, we're going to cover your show's setup. We're going to cover the audio recording, what you're going to need for that, and a couple of easy ways to approach it. We're going to set up your podcast hosting account, and that's how the world gets your show. You have your audio file, you put it on your podcast host, and from there, poof, it goes out into the world. And then we're going to do your Apple Podcast Connect account. This is a manual process. There are several manual processes that you can do. Setting up your Apple Podcast Connect account is the most important one. So we're going to quickly cover that. So the first thing we're going to cover is audio recording. There's lots of ways that you can do the audio recording. Any audio file will do. Doesn't matter where it comes from. You can record on your phone with your headphone mic, or you can buy a simple podcast mic. My podcast mic, this one, $50. I've been using it for years. I've recorded hundreds of podcast episodes on it. It will do just fine. You don't need to spend a lot of money. If you're recording a solo show, then you only need one audio track and you could literally do that on your phone. If you're recording interviews, and a lot of the time this is what I recommend for all the fringe benefits, and sometimes people will do a mix, you'll want to use probably a remote podcast audio platform. And the one I recommend is Zencastr. I recommend it for several reasons. One, it's very simple. Number two, it's free. Free is one of my favorite things. I record an awful lot of my podcast episodes using Zencastr, and I use the free account. There's no requirement for me to pay for it. So I would encourage you to do the same. So we're going to set up your Zencastr account. You'll find a link in the description for this video. It's free. I'm going to show you through it in a minute rather than jumping into that just now. The next thing you're going to need is a podcast hosting account. I recommend Captivate. I'm going to jump in here in a minute. The reason I recommend Captivate is it's very simple to use, and they make the distribution of your show very simple. Podcast hosting a few years ago, it used to be very, very complicated. Frankly, you had to be a NASA scientist or a deep nerd to be able to work out how to do it. It's become very, very simple, and Captivate make it really, really easy. Let's jump in and actually set up a new podcast show. So when you log into Captivate, this is my Captivate account. I have a few shows on here, some for me, some for clients. But when you set up a new show, you create your account, and a word of advice here, you need the cheapest Captivate account. You don't need to spend a lot of money on podcasting hosting. The costs scale depending on your audience size. You need a very big audience before you need anything other than the basic account. So here I'm going to create a new podcast in my Captivate account. And here I have a simple form to fill out. My podcast show is called Is it a private show? No, it's not. And then we need to add some podcast artwork. This is something you might need. I would recommend doing that in Canva. This is my podcast artwork in Canva, and the previous podcast artwork in Canva, and the artwork before that in Canva. It's very, very simple to use. You'll find lots of templates for that inside of Canva. It's not what we're doing just now. So back into Captivate, we're going to add podcast cover artwork. Oh, they want me to drag and drop my files. I'm going to browse. Updated my podcast artwork today, so it's on the desktop. There we go. We're done. Description. You need to add in a description for your show. This needs to, as it says, describe your show. You need to pick a category. There are lots of categories here. You can pick 3 categories. Your primary category, if you're working with me as a client, you're probably going to be having something in the business category. Then your directory settings. I better pick a category first. How's your show formatted? It's episodic, it's clean. I would like it to show lots of episodes on the Apple Podcasts. Default publish time for me, it's 5 a.m. Really doesn't matter. You pick your time. I like it to be at 5 a.m. That way people further east of me pick it up at a reasonable time in the morning. And then confirm your feed. This is an important part because you want your feed address to reflect what people might search for. So the Rubber Duck Show is all for rubber duck enthusiasts. So that makes perfect sense. And then I create my podcast. And that's your podcast setup done on Captivate. You can see here, we're now in the Rubber Duck Show dashboard, and we can jump straight into publishing an episode. I'm not going to do that, but I want to draw your attention to a couple of other areas. So first of all, I'm going to take you to Captivate's distribution. Distribute. There we go. So within here, they make submitting your show to other podcast aggregators, I'll call them, people like Spotify, Stitcher, some of the apps that people have on their phones where they listen to the podcasts. You want to distribute your show to as many of these as possible. Many of these you just submit with one click. Some of them you need to go and create accounts. A lot of this is automatic. Your main one is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music. They're very, very straightforward. The next place I want to show you is Team. If you're working with other people, click on Team. You can add other people to your team, like an editor or a virtual assistant. You can also look at podcast analytics. You can see how your show is performing. Obviously, there's nothing here, so there's nothing to see. You can also very, very easily add ads to your podcast. Now, if you're brand new, you might not want to, but you can. Where is that gone? Ad editor. The ads you'll actually find inside of each show, but you can set up some automations there. And then another nifty little thing is guests. You can actually use Captivate to manage booking your guests, much like you might use Acuity scheduling or Book Like a Boss or things like that. I personally don't use it, but you can. So that is Captivate. Your Captivate account is very, very simple. Set up the account with your podcast details, and then you can go straight into publishing an episode, but we'll come back to this later. So now we've got your audio recording account set up in Zencastr. We've got your podcast host account set up with Captivate. The last thing we need to do to set up your podcast is set up your Apple Podcasts account. So let's jump over to Apple Podcasts. In the description below this video, you'll find a link to where you go to submit your podcast to Apple. It's a little bit tricky to find, so click on that link there. Once you're in, this is my existing show. We want to click on Add a New Show, and add a new show with an RSS feed. That's you. Then we want to click on Next, and straight away they're asking for the RSS feed. So we will find that back in Captivate. So I click on Dashboard, copy RSS feed. So we copy that. It's now copied to my clipboard. And now we simply paste that into Captivate, into Apple Podcasts, and we click Add. That is it. So now we simply have to wait for Apple to approve this show. That can take anything from a day to a week. That doesn't mean you have to wait for that to launch your podcast, because you can still have your podcast in Spotify and Amazon and Google and all these other players within probably 15 minutes of going through that distribution list. So just double checking. The one thing I noticed here is it says show details. We're still processing your show. Check back later and then click publish. So we need to wait for Apple Podcasts to process this. And I think that's the part that can take between a couple of days and a week. So I'm pretty sure they send you an email. This process changes from time to time. So that's the Apple Podcasts part. So at this point, we've done all the setup for our show. We have an audio recording platform in Zencastr. We have the podcast hosting account, and we've now submitted it to Apple Podcasts Connect. That's the setup done. You are now set to start recording and actually creating content and adding it to your show. So let's go through that now. What we're going to work through now is your regular routine: audio recording, audio editing, show upload, and scheduling. Again, it's very, very straightforward. So for this audio recording, I'm going to come back to Zencastr. So remind you, Zencastr is free. You don't need a paid account for this. When you log in, you will be here and you want to click the new episode button. Personally, I don't do video podcasts at the moment. Very occasionally I do. So I'm going audio only. I need to give it a name, audio only, and create the episode. And we just need to wait a moment and we're done. Now, if you're doing solo shows, this is you ready to hit record. If you're doing a guest show, then you might want to invite a guest, in which case you click the invite button at the top, copy the link, and then simply send them that link. And they will receive an email with that link from you, or you can schedule that invitation through Zencastr. And then they will appear in here as well. And then it'll be a lot like you're on a Zoom call, but with no video. Really simple. So now we're ready to hit record. You can see the waveform there is moving. So I'm going to start recording, 3, 2, 1. And now I'm recording a podcast for this week. You can see the waveforms moving, and the guest and I will chat away here. Normally you would see 2 waveforms, one for me and one for the guest. Once the show is finished, I simply hit stop. It will upload. When it's finished, I'm now ready to download my MP3 file, ready to edit. Again, I would ignore this produce your podcast button. You don't need to do that. You can do that later on. And I think that's only in a pro account anyway, but it's frankly unnecessary. So next we download that MP3 file and save that. The recording is that simple. You can do this solo or you can do it as a guest. One bonus feature for me within Zencastr is it automatically also sends the audio file to a Google Drive folder, which means I don't have to do the downloading and the uploading. I simply drag and drop it into the folder, which I share with my editor. Which brings us on to the next part, really, which is audio editing. Now, my perspective on this is, how do you value your time? If you are starting out in business and you've got lots of time, by all means, edit your show yourself. If you don't have lots of time, then delegate the audio editing to a professional audio editor. That's what I do. But I'm going to show you how to do the editing anyway. There are 2 main processes that I have used for this. There are lots of ways to edit a podcast. I'm going to show you the 2 that I like the best, and you can decide how you want to do it. So the first method that I'm going to show you is using free software called Audacity, and it really is very straightforward. You import your audio file, which you saw me download a moment ago, and you'll see we have a waveform here. And editing the podcast is as simple as moving along the timeline and editing any words that you don't like. For example, here, I'm not sure if this will work if I hit play, if you'll hear that, but I'll try it. No, that's not going to work because I'm on StreamYard. But it's very straightforward. You hit play, you can listen to the audio. At any point, you can simply copy or cut out any text. It's very much like using a tape on a razor blade. I would say probably 80% of podcasts that you listen to will be edited this way. There is another tool which I don't personally use, but if I was editing my own podcast, again, it's probably how I would do it now. So this is using an app called Descript. With Descript, you can also record directly into Descript, bypassing Zencastr, but it wouldn't work with guest interviews, which is why I haven't really introduced it as a recording platform. It also is a paid tool, and virtually everything I've shown you so far is free. So here you can see there's a podcast that I've preloaded into Descript. And straight away you can see, but this is text, this is not audio. So what Descript is doing is it's automatically transcribing the podcast into text. So you can see at the top of the window, we have the text, and then the bottom, we have the waveform like you saw before. So in order to edit the podcast, all we have to do is highlight the text, move it around, or delete it. So one of the things you'll most commonly do when you're editing a podcast is taking out things like ums and ahs. So here you can see there is an Now I want to remove that. So if I put my cursor there and I hit play, so you can hear the there. If I simply delete that, you can hear that word is gone. So that has gone. So really your editing becomes as simple as editing a Word document. It's really straightforward. When you're done, you can simply export it and you have your audio file ready to go. So that's the two main methods. There's the old school waveform editing with Audacity in this case. You can also use Adobe Audition for that. But obviously that comes at a hefty cost. Lots of other ways you can do it. So that's the editing side of things. And I'll remind you, personally, I prefer to delegate that out because it's quite time consuming and I have other things to do. So the next part of the process is going back to Captivate and actually publishing an episode of your show. So I'm now coming back to Captivate, to the Rubber Duck Show, and we're going to click Publish New Episode. Simply drag and drop a show onto here. Here we have test recording MP3. I'm just going to drag that into there. We add a title. And again, this should be compelling. You need to have a bit of pop and sparkle in your title. Add in your show notes, just a description of what this episode is about, sometimes a call to action, maybe a link to your guest website, your website, and a lead magnet. I don't bother with any of that, or that, or that. You can add a transcription here. I don't do episode artwork. You don't need to add anything here or there. Simply pick a date to publish, and I generally always go for a Monday, and I always go for 5 a.m., but you do you. We don't need advanced options. Schedule the episode. I must enter show notes. Okay. I've added a note. Schedule the episode. And now, on Monday at 5 a.m., that fake episode will be posted into my Captivate account, will be available on that RSS feed for Spotify to pick up, which if I don't go and delete this show right now, will happen automatically. And will also be distributed to Apple Podcasts, terrifyingly, unless I remember to delete that show on Apple Podcasts very, very soon. So that is podcasting from start to finish. We're done. There are a million other things that you could do. There's a lot that you could do, but you really don't need to do them. They're all optional. My own checklist is very, very long. It includes adding it to my website as a blog post, writing show notes, adding transcriptions, creating social media animations, adding it to a weekly email out to my list. But this is all optional and you can build it as you go. So I hope you found that helpful. That really is podcasting from start to finish. To quickly recap, that begins with your regular show setup, consisting of setting up your audio recording suite, Zencastr, your podcast hosting account, Captivate, and your Apple Podcast Connect account. That will take 15 to 20 minutes. Then you're onto your weekly routine of recording an audio file, editing that audio file, and uploading it to Captivate. Boom, done. Super simple. If you've enjoyed this video, then I would love for you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you are thinking about launching a podcast, you're probably going to find almost all of my videos really, really useful. They're not all about podcasting, but they are all about building, marketing, and monetizing your personal brand. Very, very practical. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.